Stacy Bowe with Strategic by Nature. I'm working with Nicole and Michaela and River Network to help organize these peer learning calls for stream management and integrated water management planning. So I think we have a couple more people coming in on the call, so I'm just going to get started with the agenda overview, and then we'll go through the rest of our day. So thanks everybody for taking the time to be here today. We are going to be talking about how to move forward with stream management and integrated water management planning during the pandemic. It should be a really exciting call. I'm really excited about the speakers that we have in place, and I know this is definitely a shared challenge that everybody has, and so it'll be really nice to hear from all of you about how you're doing all of this as well. So some of the things that we're going to specifically do is just problem solve around what are the adaptations we're having to make in our stream management planning processes. And we're also modeling, if you will, how to run a effective online meeting today. And I'm really excited. One of the very cool things about working with River Network is I would say they've been one of the leaders in running online meetings and turning their entire River Rally conference virtual, and we've got a lot to learn from them. So Nicole's gonna help us with that as we go through the meeting today. And really the other thing that we're trying to do today, if you've been on last calls, is spend a little bit more time connecting with each other. So we are gonna use a couple features in our Zoom meeting that we haven't before, such as the breakout rooms, and really try and get you guys to connect with each other in a smaller group setting instead of just as a full, how many do we have, 19 people group, which makes that kind of challenging sometimes. And so just quickly, we're going to start off as we're doing some introductions in a little bit more creative way than we've done before. We're going to hear from Michaela Mullins, the New River Network Program Associate, to talk about really the term community of practice and what that means and how it relates to all of you being here in this Zoom room today. And then we're going to go into our panel discussion. I'm really excited to have Ryan Golton with CBI, Jesse Olson with Left Hand Watershed Center, and Mike Remke from Mountain Studies Institute here to talk about some of the adjustments they've made in their peer learning, SMP processes. And then they're really going to help us set up our breakout discussion, which we'll do for a portion of the last part of the call. And then we'll debrief on best practices. And then as in the agenda I emailed you, there's a ton of resources that we link to, and we'll review those at the end of the call as well. So in terms of our Zoom logistics, now that we seem to have most people here, you'll see that on the left side of your toolbar is the mute button. And if you could just, because there's so many people, keep yourself muted, your device, if you're on your phone or your computer. And then when it's time to talk, you can unmute yourself. And then please turn on your camera, especially during the first part of this. And when we do the breakouts, your camera has to be enabled in order for you to be moved to the breakout room. So it would be great if you did it at least for those sections, and if you need to check out or take a break in between, that's fine, but definitely keep your camera on when we get to those portions. And then another thing that you can do while I'm running through these introductions is get a Sharpie marker and a Post-it handy, because we're gonna do a little activity with these. Thank you, Nicole. So even if it's not a Sharpie, some sort of dark marker and a little piece of paper, a square-ish is good. Not that we all have circled paper laying around, but the other thing that's happening is we are recording this webinar so that we can share it. We do have the new community learning webpage on coloradosmp.org, and we're sharing these webinars so that the rest of our community that couldn't be here today could at least participate in the recorded version. And we also have the chat feature, so as we go, if you have things you want to say or things you want to let everyone know, you can definitely use the chat. Just remember that if you're using the private chat, when we download the chat box, everyone will see the private chat. So don't say anything you don't want your friends in this call to hear, or use your texting on your phone instead. And then, like I said earlier, we'll be polling. You'll see some pop-ups on your screen, and we'll explain those when we get to them. And we'll also be using the breakouts, and I'll explain those more when we get to those as well. So with that, we're going to start with our introductions. And because we have 21 people on the call, we're going to shift this a little bit and not do what we usually do, which is have everyone introduce themselves verbally. So instead, I want you all to give each other a really good wave. Good morning. And in the chat box, type your name, the SMP that you work on, and your role in that SMP. And I'll give everyone, or IWMP, and I'll give everyone a minute to do that. And then you can just scroll through that as we go today. So again, in the chat box, your name, your SMP, and your role. And we'll give everyone a minute to do that. Excellent. All right, thank you guys. As these keep popping in, I'm going to explain the next activity. So if you know me, you know I like to do art. If you don't know me, that's what I do, enjoy that as a side hobby. Also, we're trying to demonstrate some really cool best practices today. And a couple of us have seen an activity on Zoom that involves art. And so we wanted to do something today that was kind of fun. So take your square paper and your Sharpie, and this square represents the state that we live in, Colorado. And I'm sure you can tell on the square based on where you live. What I want you to do is just take a minute and write or draw or whatever expression you can do with a Sharpie marker, your SMP watershed. And take a minute and just indicate on your square what your watershed is. And while you're doing that, we do have one person on the phone, and I want to make sure that you can introduce yourself. So you have last four digits of 1915. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can tell us who you are. Go ahead.
Hey, this is Julie Knudsen. My Wi-Fi down here in Trinidad is not too hot, so I am calling in by phone, but also by video.
Oh, okay, thank you, Julie.
Yeah. And I just merged her audio and her video.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay, you should be almost done. This isn't going to take a long time. And what I want you to do is just hold your watershed, and it's back. I wrote mine backwards, but hold your watershed up to your camera so that we can see it. And I'm going to take a quick screenshot of all of this. So everyone get your watersheds up there. I should turn mine around. There, you can kind of see it better. All right. Okay, we've almost got everybody. We're going to take the picture in 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, wait, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, good job. Okay, thanks everybody. All right, so now we're gonna move into the first part of our agenda, and we're gonna turn over to Michaela. And I don't know, Nicole, if you wanna introduce Michaela, and then we can have her do our presentation.
Sure, yeah, I would be happy to do that. Morning, everybody, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Some of you probably know that I had a hiring process out several months ago to bring somebody on to assist me with a bunch of the Colorado-based work and the Colorado Basin work at River Network. So I was looking for somebody that had a strong background in agriculture as well as like peer training and learning. And I was really lucky to find Michaela. She lives in Denver, and she comes to us from Denver Urban Garden to the public health background as well as an agriculture background. And so she's getting up to speed on all of the stream health and river health work that everybody's doing. So welcome, Michaela.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. All right, let me share my screen here with you. Okay, can everyone see that? We're good? Okay, awesome. Yeah, like Nicole said, my name is Michaela Mullins. I think I'm on week 5 or 6 here at River Network, so still very much finding my footing in this new role as the Science and Policy Program Associate. And I'll really be working very closely with Nicole and supporting you all, as well as helping River Network kind of understand or better understand our role and niche in this intersection of healthy rivers and agricultural landscapes. So I'll be doing some focus groups and key informant interviews this year to kind of learn more about what that intersection looks like and how River Network can best support people who are working in that area. Like Nicole said, my background is in environmental public health. So here for the last 6 years, I've been working in Denver on various community-based programs and projects with an emphasis on food access and food system work. And prior to that, I was a small-scale farmer up in the Pacific Northwest, which is much easier to grow things out in Washington State than here in Colorado. I'm still figuring that out. Yeah, and I'm here in Denver, and I'm ready to, or excited to start talking about communities of practice. And sorry, my dogs are barking there in the background. But anyways, so we're going to talk about communities of practice and just kind of what it is. It's a really high-level introduction to what this term is. But before we dive into that, we're going to use our toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see the reactions. And just give me a thumbs up if you've been a part of a community of practice or if you've heard of that term before. I'll give everyone a few seconds here. Awesome. So it looks like a few of you know what I'm talking about, which is great. For those of you who haven't heard of one, you're actually in a community of practice. So our SMP or IWMP Peer Learning Network could be considered a community of practice. And I just wanted to give you a quick history of how this group came to be. So I've got my notes here, but Nicole, let me know if I miss anything of importance. So in 2017 through 2018, River Network, Nicole, and some of our key partners went around the state and hosted a handful of meetings to learn from local coalitions what their needs are to begin an SMP process. And there are really 3 main goals of hosting these meetings. The first goal was to articulate the knowledge and capacity needs of local coalitions that want to initiate an SMP. The second goal was to identify resources and tools that are either currently available or could be created. And finally, to create pathways to connect needs at the local level with expertise on an ongoing basis. And so we had these conversations all over the state of Colorado. And what we learned was that we need to have a group like this one who comes together on phone calls or meets in person when possible to just share knowledge and learn from one another and build out that network across the state. So what is a community of practice? It is probably a new term for some of you. So a community of practice, it's a group of people who share a common concern, a set of problems or an interest in a topic, and who come together to fulfill both individual and group goals. Communities of practice often focus on sharing best practices and creating new knowledge to advance a domain of professional practice. And interaction is on an ongoing basis is an important part of this. So there's lots of benefits of having a community of practice, and particularly thinking of how this can be used as a framework for your coalition in your SMP planning process. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat box if you could just type in a few ideas that you have as to why you think kind of framing the work that you're doing with your group as a community of practice might be beneficial. I'll just give everyone a few seconds there. Yeah, Nicole says, trying not to repeat the same mistakes in SMPs, learning from each other. Yeah, learning from each other. I think that's really one of the most important things of a community of practice. We're all contributing. Yeah. Good best practices. Cool. Yeah, there's lots of great ideas coming in. I like that, sharing successful methodologies and and dead ends, which have boxed in quickly on me there. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go to my next slide here. So there's lots of potential benefits that a community of practice has. So you kind of hit on some of these. We've got connecting people, providing a shared context, enabling dialogue, stimulating learning, capture and sharing existing knowledge, introduce collaborative processes, help people organize and generate new knowledge. So I just kind of want to call out a few of those on that list. Connecting people is really important, especially when you're able to bring folks together who might not otherwise have the opportunity to interact either as frequently or at all. So that's a huge benefit, I think, of having a community of practice. Another really great benefit is enabling dialogue between people who come together to explore new possibilities, solve challenging problems, and create new mutually beneficial opportunities. And also generating new knowledge to help people transform their practice to accommodate changes in needs and technologies. So there's, again, lots of great benefits, but those are kind of three that always stand out to me. Okay, so how do we even start designing a community of practice? And I just kind of wanted to quickly introduce this, and we're not going to get into it. That might be a whole other conversation or a phone call all in its own. But it's a cyclical process, and it's continuously an ongoing thing. But I think a really great spot to start is understanding the context. And by that, I mean knowing who is going to be in your community of practice or in your group. So who are those key players? What are the strengths that those key players bring to your group? Why are they there? And how can they help move forward a project? So kind of just grounding yourself and really understanding who's all in the room and why they're in the room and what they can bring to move the project forward, I think is a great place to start. And once you know that, then you're able to move into the purpose and outlining what your goals are, and then kind of following that whole circle around. So just kind of, again, grounding yourself in that context as to why you're all there is a good place to start when designing a community of practice. And okay, so I'm going to stop here. That was just a little teaser. And like I said, let us know in the evaluation if this is something you'd like to go more in depth on. I would really love to talk to you guys more about it and help you kind of design a community of practice for your groups and figuring out what that context is. All right, thank you all.
Thanks, Michaela. All right. If you guys have questions for Michaela, you can type them in the chat box and she can reply as we're moving on to the next presenter. We can always address those in our discussion aspect as well when we get there. So the next thing we're going to do is move on to our planning in a pandemic topic. We're going to kick it off with Ryan Golton with CBI, and she's going to talk with us about adapting stakeholder process. And then we're going to go to Jessie Olson with Left Hand Watershed Center and talking about her field season and other aspects of their organization they've adapted. And then we have Mike Remke from Mountain Studies Institute here to talk about creative monitoring and volunteer engagement approaches. They're each going to give us like a 7-minute presentation, and then we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A. And then we're going to dive into the breakout sessions. And our breakout sessions will hopefully build off of what the panelists are presenting here as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. I'm really excited to hear what she's got to say today. And you should be able to share your screen and Go for it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm on my phone and my headset doesn't work, so I'm going to hold my phone like this, and I hope you can hear me. Can you? Okay. Hi, it's nice to see so many friendly faces and familiar ones, and also nice to meet those of you I haven't met. I am a facilitator and mediator with a nonprofit called the Consensus Building Institute, and I do a lot of work on mediating water conflicts, facilitating stakeholder processes on natural resources. So, and like all of you, finding ourselves in the midst of having to do a lot of adjustments. So I am going to share my screen. Let's see here. Okay. And hopefully you all, my thought is that this topic of how do we adapt stakeholder processes to a pandemic is something that many of us are in the midst of, and I really look forward to the breakout sessions and learning from all of you about how you're doing this. I have been involved, I put in the chat, I've been involved in a number of stream management or integrated water management plans in Colorado. Several, a couple have passed and a couple are present, and so it's really interesting to learn about challenges in the different stages. So right now I'm working with folks on the Big Thompson River Envisioning SMP, and Will Davis is here, and we can talk about that, but they're like smack dab in the midst of having to make this transition to online assessments and stakeholder engagement. So that's going to be an interesting topic. Also in the Yampa, Nicole will have a lot to say about that. And a lot of the assessments have been mostly done, and so it's really a different stage. I've also been involved in the Upper Roaring Fork and in the Cooter with the city of Fort Collins. But I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I'm seeing, and I'm sure this is familiar to all of you, and I have just put here, listed a couple of learnings I think that we're having about both upsides and downsides of going online. And in a second, we'll talk about how those particularly pertain to SMPs and IWMPs. In terms of opportunities, these may be familiar, but I think we're finding that it's often actually easier to attend meetings online, and especially in big watersheds where you have to pull people together and you're having work groups, and it can be actually easier access. Often meetings can be more efficient, especially when you're trying to gather lots of different types of information. We can talk more about that, and I think breakout groups is a great example of, it's so awesome for those of you, and I think we're going to do it today, in a snap of your fingers, you can send people to breakout groups and then bring them back. Oftentimes that can be messier in big public meetings. So there are some real efficiencies and benefits. Obviously, there's lots of ways to share materials. It reduces lots of paper, and people can share screens. There's different participation options for things like surveys or prioritization, there's lots of online tools that can be used that can be helpful and creative. I think that, so switching to challenge, and these are just a sampling, but challenges, these I think are very obvious, but the one I would highlight the most is the challenge around trust and relationship building that is so critical to these kinds of multi-stakeholder planning efforts, especially around water in the West, where stakeholders who have to sit at the table in these efforts for them to be implementable and lasting. Really, this is, in a way, these are new conversations and sensitive conversations. And I think what we're learning more and more is that the trust and relationship building process that has to happen sometimes over the course of months or a year to lead to really creative solutions and to find opportunities for multi-benefit projects is harder to do online. We can talk about some learnings about how to adapt. I think likewise, having creative organic discussions, the kind that can happen when you're visiting at the beginning of a meeting or at the end or on breaks, much harder. There's issues around equity and in terms of who has access, right, to high-speed internet, to even, we find some people have data plans that prevent long-distance calling on Zoom, where that prevents access. So I think thinking about equity, and also just, as we all know, technology is a barrier. So phone lines go down, internet lines go down, et cetera. So we can talk more about these in our groups, but in the context of SMPs, and I'm going to get my screen, there we go. Okay, I think the couple things that I wanted to highlight, so I just put the sort of overall process that I think many of us are familiar with. This might be a different format up on the screen to talk about different ways in which I think these the pandemic is having an impact on stakeholder engagement. I think the first, most maybe overlooked piece is the importance of coalescing a stakeholder committee or group. And this is what I was talking about in terms of, how important it is to spend time getting people on the same page in terms of what are we doing? What are we actually trying to accomplish in this planning effort? What's going to be our process? What's our structure? How are we going to work together? What are our different interests and stories? And people have to talk to each other about why, for example, I think this is often true for irrigators, sitting down to talk with folks who they perceive as having environmental values or recreational values and not understanding them. I think it's really important for people to talk from their heart with each other about why they care and why they want to be understood and what they may be worried about. And so doing this, I think going from in-person to online just requires more planning, more one-on-one connections ahead of time, more ways to, I think, connect in smaller groups. So I think this is much harder to do in big group Zoom meetings, and it just takes a lot of more creativity and probably time and one-on-one connections. And I'd be interested to hear how all of you are doing that. I think in terms of structuring the process, once you've done the initial work, this part is really efficient and easier to do online, I'm finding. So once people feel pretty connected and coalesced as a group, they know what they're doing, you can get work groups together, you can share information, you can put things down on paper, you can figure out how to structure assessments. I think a lot of that is easier to do online in efficient, quick meetings and calls. And then I think the hardest, again, one of the biggest transitions is actually conducting a stakeholder assessment, sometimes called, a stakeholder benefits assessment or ecosystem services assessment. But this, I think, Will and the Big Thompson is a great example of, and Courtney Gutman, many of you know, of transitioning from, initially the intent was public meetings and surveys and then going into, smaller focus groups. But now it's really much more of a focus on one-on-one outreach, small focus groups where people can talk in small groups on Zoom, having maps be available no longer in person with people at a table, but online in ways that people can actually interact with. So it takes some real shifting, I think, and I know that we're going to be talking more about that in our small groups. It'd be interesting to hear what folks are doing there. And then I think this last piece around decision making, again, can be done with some of the creative online tools in terms of prioritization. So anyway, I think I'm about up in terms of time, but those are some initial thoughts. I think in terms of the benefits, many of these things I think can be lasting and hopefully we can implement and use going forward, even once we can be in person again, but certainly the challenges will no longer be quite so prevalent. So anyway, that's what I've got, and I'll look forward to hearing from the rest of you.
Thank you, Ryan. Go ahead and unshare your screen and we'll get Jessie to share hers. All right. Go for it.
All right, can you guys see that? Great. Let me get your faces out of the way. All right, so I am Jessie Olson, Executive Director with Left Hand Watershed Center. And we're a nonprofit watershed coalition that works to protect and restore watersheds for people and the environment using a collaborative and science-based approach. We're located in Boulder County and have origins as a science-based organization where we work to really clean up from the mine-related reclamation issues starting back in 2005, and really assessing the water quality issues for the duration of 10 years. And then we grew with the flood and led flood recovery efforts in left-hand watershed. And then this past year, we grew again as the board voted to expand our services beyond left-hand watershed. And we changed our mission and name. We used to be called Left-Hand Watershed Oversight Group, and now we are Left-Hand Watershed Center. So as we move into the future, we're going to continue to really represent those roots in watershed science, but while expanding our scope to holistically address watershed health and resilience at a larger scale. So we have many focus areas, and the part that relates to stream management planning is really our adaptive management process. While we haven't been leading a SMP per se, we have developed a adaptive management process which we iterate each year to determine whether or not we're maintaining our trajectory towards our desired future conditions. And so just a quick definition of how we define adaptive management. It's basically defining those desired future conditions, quantitatively tracking our progress towards those goals on an annual basis, and then adjusting our management and monitoring actions based on what we learn each year. So it's really more of a process than a plan. And this allows us to plan for uncertainty associated with climate change and dynamic watershed processes. So how has the pandemic had an impact on us, or what impact is the pandemic having on us? So we have various tasks associated with our adaptive management process that we undertake each year. And when the pandemic hit, we were in that evaluation and adjust phase. So if you go back here, you can see evaluation and adjust is sort of that last bit of our adaptive management process. And we also go back and reassess our conceptual model as to whether or not what we thought should occur is still true. And so in that process, we're really just writing reports. We're developing our state of the watershed report and analyzing data. And so when the pandemic hit, it was actually a pretty good time because we were able to just continue that work. We were also planning and implementing projects. So we had one very large construction project that we were implementing. And as many of you know, that the construction components were exempt from the stay-at-home order. So those projects were able to continue. And then we have our data collection process, community science and stewardship projects, which basically are additional planning and implementing projects, but with community. And we had some events planned and community outreach. And so how were those impacted? Let's take a look. So as I mentioned, the report writing, we were able to continue that. So that was pretty easy to accommodate. Planning and implementing projects continued. Our monitoring, however, we initially, if it had hit if our monitoring season was actually during the initial part of the pandemic and when the stay-at-home order was in place, we probably wouldn't have been able to continue. Fortunately, by the time we needed to be out in the field, we were able to, so we were able to continue that. Our community science program, which is basically engages with K through 12 students, as well as community members in doing stewardship activities, as well as helping with monitoring. We actually did cancel quite a few events, but then now we're slowly starting to figure out ways to be able to allow more events to take place at a small scale, which I can go over in the next slide. And then we had one big event, our Watershed Days event, which we had planned for September, and we're about to invest in hiring a facilitator and put a bunch of resources in dollars into that project, and we ended up canceling it. So But now it sounds like things can open up. So I'm curious to hear what you all are doing regarding events. And then our community outreach for our forest health projects, we basically put those on pause, and now we're able to kind of find ways to continue that, which I'm also curious to hear from you all. So again, the timing of this initial outbreak was really helpful because we were doing report writing, and so it was easy to accommodate. And then in terms of how we were able to get back out in the field pretty quickly, what I did was develop a memo that included these elements for our own staff and then also for our contractors. So we basically, the board adopted as a policy that we should stay 6 feet from each other, stay 20 feet from structures, limit the crews to 10 people, wearing masks, using hand sanitizer, sterilizing equipment, and then obviously staying home if you need. I'm seeing a chat. I don't know what that is. So on the positive, this pandemic has been obviously challenging. I think a lot for many of us that have kids. That was probably the most challenging part. But there are so many positives. One that I'd love to hear more from you all about is kind of really taking on the old way of doing research, or old way of doing outreach, which is basically working directly one-on-one with people and building those relationships. And so I think that just the fact that we can't have these large group meetings makes us focus on the one-on-one relationship building, which I think ends up being more positive in the long run. There's also increased efficiencies, as Ryan mentioned, no travel time. You can multitask if you're in a really long, boring meeting, those kind. And then also the planning ahead does pay off in a crisis. So we were fortunate that we grew this past year, and also with that growth, we were doing a lot of fundraising within our partners on our board, and then also with external grant opportunities. And so having that cushion right now is really helpful. Being a small nonprofit where we only have 3 staff members, also a very helpful aspect of our organization versus, someone that has to maintain $1 million budget every year. And then the most positive piece of all this as a watershed coalition that I'm finding is that people are really becoming more connected to their home watersheds, and they have such a great sense of place that they've never had before. And that is just a huge win for all watershed coalitions. And really, we can kind of take that as a new marketing campaign to help fund our watersheds and make sure that people are investing in the watersheds. And it's a really good platform for many of us to use. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan, or Jesse. Excuse me. You and Ryan have done a great job of building off each other's presentations. And last but not least, we have Mike Remke. You can go ahead and share your screen from Mountain Studies Institute and go for it.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for the opportunity to be here today. I kind of want to just start and give some context because I don't work specifically with stream management plans, but I work a lot with our monitoring programs and mountain studies. And, at MSI, we've got field work happening in a lot of different facets, from folks doing water quality monitoring to forest measurements to sampling up in the mines in Silverton. And so we have people on the ground doing a lot of different things. And I feel like what I can speak to is how COVID has forced all of us to adapt and constantly change. And so just to build off of what's already been said, I think the first step that we've really taken at Mountain Studies Institute is to really work on building protocols. We just saw a snapshot of the protocol of washing hands every 2 hours and maintaining distance in the field and wearing gloves and masks and all of these things that have come out as CDC guidelines. And I've had the honor of working on writing our protocol, and as a result have seen lots of other people's protocols. And I think the cool thing about a lot of this is the science gives really clear guidance from the CDC as to what protocols can be and should be. But I think another reality for how we've been thinking about our field season is constant change. So, you know, you write these rigid protocols and then all of a sudden it's like the status of infection starts changing, or the way we think about things starts changing, or you end up with wildfires breaking out across your geography. And so right now it's fascinating, right? We have symptom tracking in place for our field crews. And one of those symptoms is shortness of breath or coughing. Well, if you've been in Southwest Colorado, you've seen the particulates are high. We have the Six Shooter Fire, the East Canyon Fire, and then in Arizona, the Bush Fire and the Mangum Fire are all contributing to atmospheric particulates, which means if you're spending time outside, you're probably going to be coughing a little bit more than normal. I know personally, if I spend time working in smoky conditions, I'm going to develop a little like type of cough. And is that COVID, or is that particulates in the atmosphere, right? And so symptom tracking has lots of weaknesses to it, yet we also know it's one of the most efficient ways to stay on top of paying attention to individuals' health. So we have a lot of issues that we're constantly adapting to this season in terms of how we implement field work in a safe way, in a way that ensures the health of our employees, the health of our partners, and the health of our volunteers. So despite all the rigid protocols, I think I kind of want to highlight a couple different things that have come up of how we've gotten creative in terms of engaging volunteers. And so this video is on our website. We have a seed ball program where normally we take volunteers up to Hermosa Creek in the 416 fire geography, and we help volunteers make little seed balls with soil and native seed mix from the 416 fire area, and then distribute them across the landscape by taking them for a little hike. And well, instead of actually working with those volunteers, we've come up with making a video that gives the instructions on how to engage in making seed balls. And we even utilized one of my colleagues, Jeremy May's son, Micah, is generously volunteered himself to make the videos, and they're absolutely adorable. So definitely spend some time watching this. It's also a really effective way to educate volunteers on what we would have done in person and empower them to do it on their own. So we made these kits, these seed ball kits that volunteers can come and pick up and then watch the video and learn how to make the seed balls on their own time, and then go out in the field on their family hike for the weekend and still engage with the activity. So I think it's a really fun, creative solution. And then, you know, I think we like some of the other people have come up with all of these wonderful protocols that are relatively rigid and also relatively flexible depending on needs, that meet and adhere to CDC guidelines. And I think that's really effective and has really enabled us to continue our monitoring programs in terms of forest work, and has really helped facilitate a lot of the on-the-ground work to continue, whether it's with outside partners or just with our own internal staff and field crews. But something that we quickly realized is, well, we developed all of these protocols and welcome to reality, right? Field research and doing monitoring work outside often means working together in relatively close proximity. So if you have a protocol that says wear a mask and stay 6 feet apart, but you need to actually work together to understand something in the field, to collect samples in the field, then clearly your protocol is not going to work. So we've sort of adopted some flexibility on more or less a crew by crew basis of thinking about the concepts of family units, as our work crews need to spend time together and share intimate space together. And driving, you know, 3 cars to a field site that's 120 miles away just tripled the travel costs. So if instead our field crew can develop a protocol that they give consent to work as a family unit and share a more intimate work environment, including that car ride together, and be more comfortable violating the social distance rules, given that everything that the family unit does or work crew does is consensual and meets the needs of what each individual crew member feels is appropriate for trusting that other crew members will communicate that they've been potentially at risk for exposure prior to working together again, and these types of things is allowing us to be a little more flexible, to work a little more efficiently, and get the work done that we need to do, but still honor everybody's safety and comfort levels. So despite these rigid protocols, there's this like weird squishy space that we're kind of allowing our field crews to give consent to. And I think that's helping us be really malleable, really flexible, and still work efficiently in the field. And I would love to engage in conversation with everyone else on how they perceive some of this as they start implementing their own protocols. Maybe they've already run into challenges, or maybe they've found alternative solutions to the family unit concept. But I'm super curious to continue these conversations in the breakout groups. And that is what I've got for you all.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Well, this was great. I really appreciate hearing from everybody about building on that theme that Jesse brought out about sense of place, and really just, it sounds like getting more creative on figuring out how to get people to know their backyard, whether it's through monitoring or engaging them in a stakeholder process. They're spending more time on this stuff one-on-one, which is really cool. So what we're going to do now, I was going to do the Q&A, but I think what I'd rather do is go into the breakout groups, and then we'll come back. And if there's any follow-up questions that we need after that, we'll address those. So what we're going to do for the breakout session, when I click the button, you'll magically go into a breakout room if you've never done this before. And I'll share my screen again so that you guys can see the agenda. And in your breakouts, if you could spend a little time on your introductions of who you are. We're going to go into groups of 3 or 4. I don't think we have a quite even split, but most of you will be in groups of 4. And then start to build off of what you heard from the presentation today. So what impact is the pandemic having on you as a leader in your SMP or other leadership in your SMP? And really dig into some of these ideas that we've heard so far. And I want you to leave the breakout group with making a goal, either for you personally or in your professional world as an SMP leader. Identify one new action or idea that you can implement to help you or your SMP move through this challenging situation. Nicole put this in the chat box as well, and it's on the agenda, which I'll keep the share screen up during the breakouts. We'll have about 20 minutes for this, so I will every 5 minutes just let you know that it's been 5 minutes and it's time to move to the next person. If you're having a dialogue that is more based on one person going at a time, but feel free, just try and make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk, and think about what your key takeaway is from your discussion, because we'll share those back. And then if you have any questions or want to know more about what other people are doing outside of your group, definitely jot those down, and we'll use all of that for our discussion portion and share back when we get back from the breakout rooms. So if you have any questions on the breakout rooms, go ahead and raise your hand. The raise your hand button. But I'm going to go ahead and put you in the breakout rooms, and there is a way to contact me if you need help, and I'll also float around to each breakout room as we go for the next 20 minutes. So with that, enjoy. Didn't get into a breakout room that when you guys all get forced back into the big room, that means the conversations were really good. So I hope that went well for everybody. If you could, on your reactions on your toolbar, if you could give me a thumbs up or even just a wave in your camera if things went well in your breakout. Good. Okay, that's excellent. So with our time that we have, what I'd like to do is, if everyone could take a minute and type their key takeaway or their goal or something that they got out of that breakout discussion into the chat box, that would be awesome. And if you have any questions for others, you can definitely put that in there as well, or questions for our panelists. That would be great. Or you can raise your hand if you have a question for panelists. We have about 10 minutes that will wrap up conversation here. This is great. So we've got some new ideas to use surveys to reconvene the stakeholder process. Learning about the breakout groups is effective. Considering having small group field visits. Appreciate the conversation one-on-one. And I want to go on I want to see the drone tour when that's done. That sounds really cool. All right, well, while you guys are still putting your key takeaways in the chat box, I have a question for some questions for some of our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a few of these. Unless other people have questions, you can raise your hand or pop them in the chat box. So Ryan, I'm curious to go back to your presentation. You really emphasized, and I think it was a theme through all of them, this pre-work concept and being thoughtful about what we're doing, when, and really planning ahead and planning for uncertainty. So that's like something we're going to be dealing with. But I'm curious, just in a practical sense, if you could give us just an idea of how some of that pre-work works when you're doing virtual stuff as opposed to in-person events, and what that looks like for you as an organizer and coordinator.
Yeah, I think it ranges from both logistical to relational and also just structural. So I think on the relational front, it really is about how do you build in time for people to simulate the kind of sort of visiting that people really get in-person group meetings. And so, and thinking about how to take what can be a very stilted, awkward, distanced online call, for example, or meeting, and make it, and I think we're experimenting with, in these kinds of meetings, with the exact kinds of strategies I think that you can use to make people feel more comfortable. And when people get into more comfortable, creative mindsets, they can be much more collaborative, they can be much more honest, they can be much more candid. And without those candid conversations, you're just not going to get anywhere, right? It's like, it doesn't do any good for anyone to sit through an hour-and-a-half meeting if they're not really getting to the heart of what they care about and what they're worried about, or what they're most, right? And, or even getting into a mindset where they can think in terms of opportunities. So I think that, and then on the logistical front, just all the planning, you all know, that goes into making sure people have access, maybe making sure people know how to use the technology, making sure people know how to mute themselves. I mean, it can be so there's so many things that can disrupt this, like the stars have to align in order for these meetings to work well. And when they work well, they work great. They can work great. And then I think, like Jesse and others were saying, just like when to not even bother with online and just do in-person stuff for the building of the relationship. So anyway, that's a little tidbit of responding to that.
Thank you. And I know for me, one thing that I still keep learning over and over again is the transition time, like even between presenters, and like you expect things to go fast, but that's something to really plan into your meetings when you're creating agendas and that kind of thing.
Exactly, and building in time for people to join. Like it always takes longer for people to join. Yeah.
All right, well, Lori's got a question.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say Lori has her hand.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Lori.
And good modeling of using the technology, Lori.
Thank you, yeah. So I haven't tried a Zoom meeting yet with our stakeholder group, but we are getting close to needing to reconvene. And so I'm wondering, because I think we may have the possibility of being able to do something in person if our library opens up and allows for that to happen. But I also don't want to, do a separate Zoom meeting and then a separate, in-person meeting because of the dynamic of having all the stakeholders together. So I'm wondering, if anybody has tried doing a combination of a live meeting that allows for others to Zoom into, and if you have, how has that worked?
Well, I can chime in quickly. I haven't done that recently, but before the pandemic, we tried that a lot, especially when people had to travel far. And the challenge is really figuring out how you can still equalize participation from the people that are in the room versus the people online. And so that would be, I would say, a big part of your pre-work is figuring out how to make sure that the people that are online are able to engage in the same way as people in the room.
Yeah.
Other
Yep.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, Lori, we have done that a lot, and I would say echo that exactly. I think it takes a lot of real intentionality, and oftentimes maybe two facilitators, somebody who's really coordinating the technology and making sure that people, you know, online are able to see everything and can hear everybody. Oftentimes it can just feel like you're kind of a second tier participant. And then one person who's really just making a lot of extra efforts to involve the people online. But we've done it a bunch, and it totally can be done. And you just have to have like the right cameras and figure out the screen sharing and things like that. But it can work.
Okay. All right, great.
Yeah, that's what I was going to comment on the camera piece. I've done it once, and this was like a year and a half ago. We had a really big meeting that ended up like a bunch of people couldn't come because of the travel time. And so we ended up doing like half the people were in the room and half the people were on the phone doing a screen share. So we had to like set up the presentation stuff in the room, right, with the big screen for everybody, with the projector for everybody in the room, and then also simultaneously broadcast that over Zoom and have a camera on who was speaking in the room so that people online could see it. It worked, but it would be awesome if we had like places where you could do that, like physical, like somebody should start a business. Because just getting the technology set up is really hard.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Lori. We have time for one short question if anyone has one.
Stacy, I was just going to chime in. Sorry, for Lori's question. Some places have Zoom classrooms, so I don't know if libraries would have those, but I know some co-working spaces, if you have access to those, and they already have all the tech and everything that you could just have access to help with that.
All right, Julie, you had a question, and Will, if you want to type yours in the chat box, maybe we can get to that.
Oh, this was just real quick, but I had a board meeting yesterday and my board members said, hey, because it's a lot of older people on my board, and they said, we can hear everything a lot better now that we're all on the phone. And so we decided that from now on, when we go back to in-person meetings, that we would pass a cell phone around or something so that when people are speaking, that the people on the phone can hear. So maybe if you try and do this combo Zoom thing, you could also call in on a cell phone and have everybody speak into that.
Thanks, Julie. And Will's question is wondering if you choose who was in the breakout groups or if they were randomly chosen, and Zoom lets you do either. So what I did today was I randomly chose them, and then I switched a couple around, so I made sure that we didn't have our panelists, for example, in the same breakout. And I didn't put Nicole and Kim together because they can get, you know, little feisty sometimes. So, all right, well, I'm gonna move us on to Nicole to continue this conversation about best practices for online meetings. And I just wanna thank everyone. Keep putting your key takeaways in the chat box as we go, because we wanna share these with the people that weren't here today. So go ahead, Nicole.
Okay. So the first thing I'm going to share with you guys. So I asked, when you guys registered, I asked if you had a horror story or a best practice. And Heather Lewin with the Roaring Fork Conservancy registered but didn't join us. But I put in the chat box her horror story, which involves a child injury. Which is funny. And then we kind of had a horror story up here in the Yampa. We had our first virtual basin roundtable meeting, I don't know, like 3 weeks ago, a month ago. And we used the state's WebEx, I think it was WebEx platform to do this. And nobody realized that it had limitations on the number of people that can be in the room. And our chair for the roundtable was one of the last people to join the meeting. He was late, and so he couldn't get into the meeting. And so after like 20 minutes of trying to figure out why Alden couldn't get in the meeting, and like we finally had to just completely switch to a new platform for everybody. So CWCB staffer who was like quick on his feet, like he had to basically create a whole new meeting on a different piece of software. So we started the whole meeting like a half an hour late, and it was so bad. So know your participation limits on your software. Okay, so hopefully, so we tried to model some ideas for virtual meetings rather than me like giving you a big long PowerPoint presentation. So I want to just sort of recap a few of the things that we did. And then I also want to share a couple of things that I've seen that we did not do, but that you could do. So Stacy, if you'll notice when we kicked off the meeting, Stacy started with a really quick overview of the software features. So where's your mute button? Where's your camera button? Here are the polls. Like here, here's how you do different pieces of things on the toolbar in the software. And so just don't make an assumption that everybody knows how to use the software features. And so spend a minute at the beginning kind of going through that. Make sure you have the ability to mute everybody. The organizer usually can mute everybody automatically, and then you mute and unmute as you want to talk so that there isn't a lot of background noise. You'll notice in the agenda that Stacy sent out, it's super detailed in terms of like the questions that we're asking you in the chat box. And when you're in your breakout groups, the questions we ask you in your breakout group are on your agenda. And so that way you have that stuff in front of you in the meeting rather than being like, what are we supposed to be talking about? So try to make your meeting agendas really detailed that follow the format of the meeting. For larger groups, we use the chat box to do introductions. I have been on some calls lately where we've spent the first 25 minutes going around and everybody introducing themselves. And it's honestly, I don't think it's a great use of time. I mean, you lose something by not seeing every person, introduce themselves, but I also think like we're all doing enough of these meetings that it's kind of exhausting. And so try to keep them as short as you can. So that's the other piece. I don't think you should go over an hour and a half, honestly, or if you do go over an hour and a half, try to have breaks in the meeting where people can like shut their camera off and go away. Having some participatory exercises like the visual thing, doing the breakout group. Try to use those features to break up the conversation. Try not to have one person talking for more than like 15 minutes. It gets really hard to focus. Like our brains don't want to do that. And then let's see what else. Oh, and then there were a couple things so River Network had an all-staff meeting with a facilitation group, and I'm actually going to share my screen here really quick. So that you can see this, because it was really interesting. This was a debrief on River Rally. We moved River Rally virtual. And so one of the things that they did is they shared these Google slides with us. And so we did do introductions and and they did this kind of around the table. And if you do want to do individual introductions with everybody on the call, oftentimes it helps to call on people or have an order so that it isn't like people aren't talking on top of each other or somebody's just like, kind of pulls back and doesn't want to talk. So using something like this where you have it like clearly like who's on the call and you go around in a certain order, I thought was a pretty cool idea. We also did these listening pairs where it got a little touchy-feely, I will say. That was kind of the purpose of the call. But rather than breakout groups of, 4 or 5 people, we actually were, it was just 2 people. And we were supposed to just talk and listen to each other for a few minutes. And so to Ryan's point about having those sort of more candid conversations, oftentimes it's better to do small groups like this, where it's just like 2 people talking. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, which I thought was pretty cool, is this. So this slide, we all have the ability to move our names around in the Google slide. And so the question was, when we started, everybody's name was down here along the bottom. And then the question, the question is right here, and then we all moved our name as to like where we thought we were on the spectrum of strongly agree to strongly disagree. And so this is a pretty cool way to get people to, show where they're at in a spectrum. For if you have a specific thing you're trying to like take the temperature of the room on. So those are just a few things that we did at River Network that I thought were pretty cool. And then the last feature, and I wanted to mention in the additional resources section of your agenda, the very last one is River Network Rally Workshop Zoom Best Practices video. So for River Network, when we did Rally, and we created basically a sort of illustrated guide to best practices in Zoom for those Rally presenters. So if you want to learn more about how to use the breakout groups, you can watch that video. And it's obviously it's not meant for a general audience, it's meant for just the Rally folks. But. Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to kind of do as a best practice in Zoom is polling. You can oftentimes kick off a call with polling, or you can do it like we're doing now, which is evaluating your call. So you guys should have up in front of you our evaluation for this call, and we would like you to take it. Stacey, I'm assuming you guys can see that.
Yes, thanks. While people are doing that,
Okay.
I just want to jump down to, maybe I'll just cut it into this. The other thing that you could do while you're doing your poll is to put in your chat box something that worked for you today in this call that you liked, or something that you would change for the future. And that is another way to get evaluation feedback from folks and allows them to type that in. And because you can't really ask for that qualitative feedback on the polling. So one thing you liked and one thing you would change. All right, and while you're doing that evaluation work, we just wanted to let you know it is 11:30, so we'll just wrap this up fast. There's a couple resources that we want you to check out. They're linked on your agenda that I sent. And then there's another opportunity I'm putting in the chat box right now. There's a inclusive civic engagement webinar from the Colorado Foundation, Water Education Colorado, coming up, and it should be really relevant to a lot of the work that we're doing. So we hope that you guys can engage in that as well. And finally, a couple of the SMPs around the state are doing monitoring still and are presenting opportunities for people to go out and learn how they're doing monitoring. So Jesse, for example, is doing work still out in their watershed, and if anybody's interested in potentially going out there and joining her for a day to learn the monitoring protocols, or just volunteering your time, that's an option. And so I wanted to put that opportunity out there, and if anybody else is in a similar situation, if you put that in the chat box, if you're looking for volunteers or just have a day that you'd be willing to train another SMP lead on how you do your work, put that in the chat box and we can match you up and coordinate that so that you can have those opportunities to keep learning, even though we can't be face-to-face. Well, you can be face-to-face outside. If you're willing to go to your neighboring watershed or something like that to learn something. Anybody, Nicole, do you have any other closing comments?
No, we've got, so 13 of the 17 folks have taken the poll. My guess is that maybe like Kim and Stacy haven't. So so I think that we're good. I'm going to go ahead and end polling here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
You guys can see you can see the results of that.
Thank you. And it looks like Jesse shared some information about volunteers, and we'll get that information connected to everybody. And so just watch the emails. And then the most important place, the go-to place at coloradosmp.org is a new community and learning page. So we're posting upcoming events for these types of calls and all the recordings of these calls and other resources. So if there's something that you want to check out, please go there. And we will be in touch with the notes and the recording from this call very soon. So thank you all so much for being here, and we'll we'll stay on if you want to add more things to the chat box, but the rest of you guys can have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks guys. It was great to see you.